Welcome back to our channel.
Welcome. I am Lisa.
And I'm Eric. Do you want to improve your English easily? If so, you're in the right place.
So let's get started and make English easy. So Eric, what are the words today?
The first word today is skeptical. Then we will continue with punctual and to storm off. Then to comply with. And the final one is under the weather.
So let's start with the first word.
The first word today is skeptical.
Skeptical.
Skeptical is an adjective. It means not easily believing something. If you are skeptical, it means you have doubts, or you are not sure that something is true. For example, if someone tells you a story that sounds strange, you might feel skeptical about it.
That's right. When someone is skeptical, they don't easily believe what they hear or see. Let's give some examples. This is the first one. Anna was skeptical about the new diet plan. It means that Anna wasn't sure if it would work or not.
Exactly. Now, I'll give another example. Tom was skeptical when his friend said he could fly a plane. It means that Tom did not really believe his friend could fly a plane. He thought it wasn't true.
So, one thing to note is that skeptical is an adjective. We often use it with the preposition about. For example, skeptical about something.
Yes, that's important to remember. Now, let's move on to example dialogue.
Hey Mike, have you heard about the new superhero movie?
Yeah, I heard about it, but I'm a bit skeptical. I don't think it will be very good.
Really? I think it looks fun. Why are you skeptical?
Well, the last movie by the same director wasn't that great, so I'm not sure about this one.
That was a nice dialogue, Eric. It shows how we use skeptical to talk about not believing something completely. Do you think being skeptical is good or bad, Eric?
I think it can be both. Sometimes it's good to be skeptical so we don't believe everything right away. But sometimes it's also important to be open-minded.
I agree. And do you think skeptical is a common word?
I think it's a bit more common in formal situations, like when talking about news or information, but people use it informally too, especially when they have doubts.
That's true. I think it's a useful word for everyone to know. It helps us express when we are not sure about something.
Absolutely, Lisa.
So I think we have explained skeptical pretty well. Let's move on to the next word.
The next word is punctual.
Punctual.
Punctual is an adjective, which means being on time. If you are punctual, it means you arrive at the correct time, not late. For example, if your class starts at 9 o'clock and you are there at 9, you are punctual.
Right, Eric. Let's look at some examples. The example sentence is, John is always punctual for work. It means that John is never late for work. He always arrives on time every day.
Exactly. Now it's my turn. The bus driver is very punctual and always leaves at 8 a.m. It means that the bus driver always starts the bus at 8 a.m., not before or after. He leaves right on time.
Now, let's move on to our sample dialogue about the usage of punctual.
Hey Tom, are you coming to Sarah's party tonight?
Yes, of course. I will be there at 7 p.m. I'm always punctual, you know.
Ha, yes, you are. Sarah will be happy if everyone is punctual tonight.
That was a nice dialogue, right? It shows how being punctual can be important even for social events like parties.
Absolutely, Eric. Now, let's have a little chat about the word punctual. Eric, do you think being punctual is important?
Oh, definitely, Lisa. I think being punctual shows respect for other people's time. If you are late, it can make other people wait, and that's not very nice.
I agree. And do you think punctual is a formal word?
Not really. I think it's a word we use in both formal and informal situations. You can say it when talking to friends or even in a meeting at work.
Yes, exactly. It's a useful word. And I think it's good to be punctual, not only for work but also for friends and family. It makes everyone happier.
Absolutely. So, everyone listening, try to be punctual. It's a simple way to make a good impression.
Well said, Eric. That's all for today's word, punctual. We hope you found it helpful and learned something new today. Let's move on to our next word.
All right, Lisa. The next phrase we have is comply with. Comply with is a phrasal verb, and it means to follow rules or instructions. When you comply with something, you do what you have to do according to a rule, request, or law. It's like following something that you have to do.
Eric, could you give us an example?
Of course. Here's the first example sentence. All employees must comply with the company's safety rules. It means that all employees must follow the company's safety rules to keep everyone safe.
Good example, Eric. Here's another one. Drivers must comply with traffic laws to avoid accidents. This means that drivers need to follow the rules of the road. If they don't, they could cause accidents.
Exactly. And a quick grammar tip. Comply is usually followed by with. You can't just say, comply the rules. You need to say, comply with the rules.
Right. Now let's move on to a short dialogue to show how comply with can be used in a conversation.
Did you hear about the new regulations at work?
Yeah, we have to comply with them, even if they seem a bit strict.
I know, but I think they help keep everyone safe, so it's important.
You're right. It's better to comply with the rules than to take risks.
It was good dialogue. Lisa, have you ever had to comply with a lot of new rules?
Good question, Eric. It reminds me of when I started my first job. They had a lot of safety rules, and I made sure to follow them all. It was overwhelming at first, but I knew it was for everyone's safety.
That's a good point, Lisa. I remember when my school introduced new rules about using mobile phones, and we all had to comply with them. It wasn't easy, but it helped us focus more on our studies.
These examples show how comply with is used in everyday life. Eric, do you think comply with is formal or informal?
I think it's more on the formal side. You would hear it in workplaces, legal situations, or official instructions. In everyday casual conversations, people might just say follow or obey.
Exactly. And listeners, remember, comply with is often used when talking about rules, laws, or guidelines. It's a useful phrase to know, especially in formal situations.
Absolutely. So, remember, everyone, complying with the rules is important, especially when it's about keeping people safe.
Well said, Eric. Well, that's it for comply with. Let's move on to our next phrase.
All right, the next word is storm off.
Storm off.
Storm off is a phrasal verb. It means to leave a place very suddenly because you are angry. For example, if you have an argument with someone, you might get so upset that you leave quickly. That is storming off.
That's right, Eric. Let's look at some examples. I'll start with the first one. After the argument, Sarah stormed off and didn't come back. It means that Sarah left quickly because she was very angry. She did not want to stay after the argument.
Now, here's another example. The manager stormed off the meeting when the team disagreed with him. It means that the manager got angry because the team did not agree with him. He left the meeting quickly.
One important thing to remember is that storm off is usually used when talking about someone leaving because of anger.
Yes, that's a good point, Lisa. Now, let's practice using storm off in a short dialogue.
Hey, Jack, did you see what happened at the office today?
Yes, I did. The boss stormed off when the new project idea was rejected.
I know. I couldn't believe it. He just stormed off without saying anything else.
That was a good dialogue, Lisa. It shows how storm off can be used when someone leaves because they are upset or angry.
Exactly, Eric. Do you think this phrase is common?
I think it's quite common, but mostly in informal situations. You wouldn't use it in a formal report or in a business email.
Yes, definitely. It's more of a casual phrase that we use with friends or in stories. And do you think it's good to storm off when we're angry?
Probably not. It's better to stay calm and talk things through. But sometimes people get really upset and they storm off without thinking.
True, that happens. But it's always better to try and solve the problem calmly, if we can. And that's all for today's word, storm off. We hope you found it helpful. Okay, well, what is the last word of today, Eric?
The last word of today is under the weather.
Under the weather.
Under the weather is an idiom and it means feeling unwell or a bit sick. It's a casual way to say that you're not feeling your best. For example, you might use it when you have a cold or just feel tired and not quite yourself.
That's right. When someone says they're under the weather, they're not feeling their best.
Exactly. Here's an example sentence. I didn't go to work today because I felt under the weather. This means I wasn't feeling well enough to go to work. It suggests that I felt a bit sick but not seriously ill.
Good one, Eric. Here's another example. She didn't come to the party because she was a bit under the weather. This means she didn't come because she wasn't feeling well. Maybe she had a headache or was just tired. It's often used for minor illnesses or when you're not feeling great.
And a quick note, under the weather is an informal phrase, so it's perfect for casual conversations. You wouldn't really use it in formal writing or in a serious medical context. Instead, you'd just say you're unwell or sick.
Now, let's move on to a short dialogue to see how under the weather can be used in a conversation.
Hey, David. You look a bit tired today. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm just feeling a little under the weather. I think I will become cold.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Make sure you get some rest.
Thanks, I will. Hopefully, I'll feel better by tomorrow.
That was a good example of how under the weather can be used in everyday conversation. Eric, have you ever felt under the weather?
Oh, for sure. Last week, I felt a bit under the weather, so I stayed home and rested. I think it's always good to listen to your body and take a break when you need it.
Absolutely, Eric. It's important to take care of yourself when you're not feeling well. By the way, Eric, would you say under the weather is more formal or informal?
Definitely informal, Lisa. It's the kind of phrase you'd use with friends or family. In formal situations, it's better to say you're feeling unwell or simply not well.
So, listeners, remember, if you're ever feeling just a bit off, you can say you're under the weather.
Yes, Lisa, it's a nice casual way to let people know you're not feeling your best without making it sound too serious.
I agree. Well, that's it for under the weather. So, Eric, what are the words today?
The first word today is cautious. Then we will continue with to tend and to consider, then to run out of something, and the final one is in the nick of time.
Let's start with the first word, Eric.
Today's first word is cautious.
Cautious.
Cautious is an adjective. It means being careful to avoid potential problems or dangers.
That's right. When people are cautious, they think before they act and try to stay safe.
Exactly. Let me give an example sentence. The old man was cautious when crossing the busy street. It means that the old man was very careful and watched for cars when he crossed the street. Now it's your turn, Lisa. Can you give us another example?
Sure. Here's another example. You should be cautious when driving in bad weather. It means that when the weather is bad, like when it's raining or snowing, you should drive more carefully. You should pay attention and avoid taking risks.
That's right. Now, let's talk about how to use this word. Cautious is an adjective, and we often use it with about or of something. For example, cautious about spending money or cautious of strangers.
Good point, Eric. Now, let's hear a short dialogue using the word cautious.
Hey, David, are you planning to invest in that new company?
I'm not sure. I'm a bit cautious about the company.
That makes sense. It's always better to be cautious when money is involved.
That was a good example, Lisa. It shows how people use cautious in everyday situations.
Yes, and it also shows that being cautious isn't always a bad thing. So, Eric, do you think cautious is a formal or informal word?
I'd say it's neutral. Cautious can be used in both formal and informal situations. It's quite a common word, especially when talking about safety or risks.
Yes, I agree. Are you a cautious person, Eric?
Let me think. I think I'm a bit cautious person, especially when trying new things. For example, when I was learning to ride a bike, I was very cautious at first because I didn't want to fall. I took it slowly until I felt more confident. What about you, Lisa?
I think I am cautious too. For example, I was cautious when I started driving. I wanted to make sure I was safe and didn't take any risks.
It's always better to be cautious than to deal with problems later on.
I totally agree, Eric. Well, I think we've covered cautious pretty well. Shall we move on to our next word?
Yes, let's do that. The next word is to tend.
To tend.
To tend means to usually do something or to often behave in a certain way. For example, if someone often eats a lot of sweets, you could say they tend to eat a lot of sweets. It shows a habit or something that happens often.
That's right. When we say someone tends to do something, we mean it's a kind of habit or something they often do.
Right, Lisa. Now, let's look at some examples. John tends to forget his keys. It means that John usually forgets his keys. It happens often, like a habit.
Now, here's another example. People tend to feel happy in the summer. It means that many people usually feel happy during the summer. It happens a lot because the weather is nice.
Great job, Lisa. One important thing to remember is that to tend is often used with to. So, it's tend to do something. For example, tend to forget or tend to feel. And the noun form of to tend is tendency. Children always have a tendency to feel happy when snowing.
Yes, that's an important detail. Now, let's move on to our sample dialogue.
Do you wake up early on weekends?
No, I tend to sleep in on Saturdays. What about you?
I tend to wake up early even on weekends. I guess it's a habit from my work schedule.
The dialogue shows how people can have different habits and how tend helps describe those habits.
Exactly. Eric, do you think tend is a common word?
Yes, it's quite common. You'll hear it in both casual and formal conversations when people talk about habits or things that usually happen.
I agree. It's a useful word to know because we often talk about things we do regularly. By the way, Eric, do you tend to do anything specific in general?
I tend to take a short walk when I need to think. It helps clear my mind and gives me some fresh air. What about you, Lisa?
It's a good thing to take a short walk. For me, I tend to make a list of things I need to do. It helps me stay organized and focused.
It's a really helpful way to make a list.
Absolutely. Well, we have explained how to tend pretty well. Let's move on to the next word.
All right, Lisa. The next word we have is to consider.
To consider.
Consider is a verb, and it means to think carefully about something, especially before making a decision.
Exactly. Consider means you stop and think about something in order to make a choice or decision.
Now, let's give some examples to make it clearer. Here's the first one. I need to consider all my options before I decide which job to take. It means that I need to think carefully about all the choices I have before making a decision.
Great example, Eric. Let me give another one. She is considering going back to school next year. It means she is thinking about the possibility of returning to school, but she hasn't decided yet.
Now, let's talk about a quick grammar tip. Consider is usually followed by a noun or a verb in the ing form. For example, consider taking, consider going, or consider the possibility. It helps show that you're thinking about doing something.
Useful grammar point, Eric. Now, let's move on to a short dialogue to see how consider can be used in a conversation.
Hey, David, are you still thinking about moving to a new city?
Yeah, I'm considering it, but I haven't made up my mind yet. There's a lot to think about.
I understand. It's a big decision and you need to consider everything carefully.
Exactly. I don't want to rush into it.
That was a good example of how consider can be used to describe taking time to think about something. Eric, have you considered something important recently?
Oh, definitely. I remember deciding if I should get a pet. I considered a lot whether I had enough time to care for it. It was a big choice, but I adopted a cat, and it was the best decision I made.
That sounds great. I like cats a lot. Eric, do you think consider is a formal and commonly used word?
Consider is very common, and you can use it in both formal and informal situations. You'll hear it in everyday conversations as well as in more professional or formal contexts. It's a versatile word that fits well in many different situations.
So, listeners, remember, consider is a word that helps express careful thinking before making decisions. It's common in both formal and informal situations.
Good summary, Lisa.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, now let's move on to our next word.
All right, the next phrase we have is run out of something.
Run out of something.
Run out of something is a phrasal verb. It means to use all of something so that there's none left. It's often used to talk about running out of things, like food, time, or money.
Exactly, Eric. People use it a lot. When they need to explain that, they no longer have something.
Yes, Lisa. It means you have no more of that thing left. Now, let's look at a couple of examples to make it clearer.
Sure, Eric. Go ahead with the first example.
I ran out of milk this morning for breakfast. It means that there was no milk left. The milk was completely finished.
Now, here's another one. They ran out of time during the exam and couldn't finish all the questions. It means they used up all their time and there was no time left to complete the rest of the exam.
Now, a quick grammar tip. It's followed by a noun. For example, run out of gas, run out of ideas, or run out of patience. It means that the thing you are talking about is completely gone.
Exactly, Eric. Now, let's move on to a short dialogue to see how run out of is used.
Hey, David, do you want some tea?
I'd love some, but I just realized I ran out of tea bags.
Oh, no, I have some extra if you want.
That would be great. Thanks, Emma. I always hate it when I run out of something important.
That was a good example of how to run out of can be used in everyday conversations. Eric, do you have any story about running out of something?
Oh, yes. I remember when I was on a road trip and I almost ran out of gas. It was really stressful because I had to find a gas station quickly. Luckily, I found one just in time.
That sounds stressful, Eric. I've had a similar experience where I ran out of printer ink right before an important deadline. I had to rush to the store to buy more. It's never fun to run out of something when you really need it.
Absolutely, Lisa. So, listeners, remember, run out of something is an informal phrase that you'll hear a lot in casual conversations. It's a useful way to express that something is all gone.
Well said, Eric. I think we have explained run out of something pretty well. Let's move on to our last word today.
Sure thing, Lisa. The last word today is in the nick of time.
In the nick of time. In the nick of time is an idiom that means doing something just in time or at the last possible moment before it's too late. It's often used when you manage to do something right before a deadline.
Exactly, Lisa. It's like when you almost miss something important but manage to make it just in time. Here's an example sentence. We got to the airport in the nick of time, just as they were about to close the gate.
This means we arrived at the airport just before. It was too late to board the flight. If we had been even a few minutes later, we would have missed it.
Here's another example. The firefighters arrived in the nick of time and saved the house from burning.
It means the firefighters got there just in time to prevent a disaster. If they had been a little later, the house could have been burned completely.
In the nick of time is used to emphasize the urgency or the timing of an action.
That's true. Now let's show how, in the nick of time, it can be used naturally.
Did you hear about the traffic this morning?
Yeah, I got to the office in the nick of time. The roads were so busy.
Wow, that was lucky. You almost didn't make it.
I know, I was really close, but it worked out in the end.
That was a great example. Would you say in the nick of time is formal or informal?
In the nick of time is mostly informal, and you'd hear it a lot in casual conversations. However, it can also be used in slightly formal settings, like in an office, when you want to describe and emphasize something that almost didn't happen.
I agree. Eric, do you have any experiences where you did something in the nick of time recently?
Oh, absolutely. I remember once I was catching a train and I got to the platform just as the doors were closing. I jumped in literally in the nick of time. If I had been just a few seconds later, I would have missed it.
That's a perfect example, Eric.
Definitely. So, if you ever manage to do something just before the last moment, you can say you did it in the nick of time.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our podcast. We hope you found this helpful.
Thanks for listening. Keep studying your English and don't forget to consider before making big decisions.
See you next time.
Bye.